Aloha, my homies. I got my homie Bog back here, if you guys can see him, all unicorned out. I've been playing around with the technique that I want to show you guys, and it's sort of a variation on all these concepts that we've been playing around with, making these fish react, right? It's winter, it's cold, it's really hard to make them bite sometimes, and you almost have to like force them to bite, ripping a trap, throwing that jerkbait, the erratic darts. And this is sort of a variation on that, and it's kind of cool because once again, it's reimagining the baits that we all have, like a DT8, right? A Rapala, a rock crawler, an ultra deep jerkbait. Like we have all these baits, but sometimes we don't use them to their full potential, right? Or we don't mod them in a little tweaky kind of pro way to use them in a different way that catches a bunch of fish. So what I'm gonna do is I went out on Gunnersville probably like a week ago, and I figured out this kind of cool bite. I was having trouble making fish react. I was having trouble getting down as deep as the fish were and making them react, because you throw a minnow, you can do all that forward facing crap, but like it won't work, dude. They would just follow the bait. So I figured out this little deal. It has to do with ultra deep diving jerkbaits, and then interestingly enough, mid-depth crankbaits right here. And I think it's a variation. Tactical Bassin might have done something on this maybe a couple years ago. I don't really watch a lot of YouTube, full disclosure, but this is my own little take on it, and I think it's something that could really change your game when it comes to hard bait fishing in winter. So hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get to the juice. So we're gonna run through baits. We're gonna run through how to hack out any kind of bait to do this, because you need to do a little bit of a mod, and then I'm gonna run through retrieves. Interestingly, it's a variation on a retrieve that I've talked a bunch about, and it just keeps working in different applications. I've been catching a lot of fish on a jerkbait, on a trap, little like tiny chatterbait, mini chatterbait, shallower though, like 5 foot, 4 foot, 3 foot, sometimes maybe 7 or 8, but nothing deeper than that. And so I went out deeper, like on something that's, it's basically kind of like a ledge break, you know, like a real steep kind of drop. A lot of times these fish in the winter, when they're out deep, they relate to these vertical kind of structures so they can move up and down. And what I found is these fish were either on that break or right on top of it, but they were in 10, 13, 15, 20 foot of water. They were deep, right? And I'd throw that minnow out there, and on forward facing on my active target too, I'd see them follow, but they wouldn't close, right? So I'm like, dude, I've been catching all these fish on these reaction style baits, like the jerkbait, like the trap. What bait, how can I get a bait down there to get them up? Now, the one thing I figured out really quickly is they did not want that bait to rise. It could not kind of like float up. That was bad. It needed to get down in either extremely slow sink or it needed to suspend, you know, classic suspending jerkbait kind of presentation. So what I did is I picked up this guy. I got some of the new, these are the Stunner 112 plus 2s. They're the new Berkley jerkbaits. And what I did was kind of crazy, dude. So these things run like 8 to 10 foot, and I put it on 12-pound fluorocarbon just on my standard jerkbait rod, that XD3. It's a crankbait rod, actually. It's a 7.3 medium, and I throw it out there as far as I could, like super duper far, bombing it, dude. And then I'd crankbait fish it. But my goal was not to hit the bottom, right? So what I would do is I'd do like 5 fast retrieves, reel it, 721 reel, just a standard Shimano SLX, get it down, and it would go down like 5, 6, 7 foot, right? And then I'd burn it just like we were with the jerkbait, like prior to when we were doing it over grass in like 3, 4 foot of water. But I'd burn it and get it maybe like 4 foot, 5 foot above like 10, 12, 15 foot of, you know, water, and have it just stop and pause. And what I started finding is, and once again, love it or hate it, forward-facing sonar teaches us a lot about how these fish react. So I'm staring at my active target too, and these fish are jutting out of the bottom and just chasing the bait. And when I'd stop it, they'd like get up to it, stop, and then I'd go and like take it away from them again, like almost like tease them, right? So I'd like power reel again, and they'd dart after it, and dude, they would freaking close. Like after 2 or like 3 like stops in that super long cast, that bait was down deep enough to call them up in that semi-clear water and get them to react, because it was moving so fast. They had to make a decision, like a split-second one. Do I want to eat it or not? What blew my mind the most is the water temps were like 45 degrees, dude. It's freaking cold. Maybe not cold like up north cold, but we had some cold water temps, and these fish, dude, are moving. I'm talking like scooting down the freeway, dude, like the Autobahn, no speed limit, and just blast into the bait. I'd reel it super fast again. They'd freaking follow it. Every once in a while, I'd incorporate like a twitch just to see if I could get them to close, kind of vary my retrieves, you know, say open-ended to kind of the ways they'd actually bite it. But 100%, again, that power reeling technique was key. So I could do it with pretty much any bait. The key was, though, the suspending or the slow sinking aspect. So I did it with, obviously, a Megabass, Vision 110 +2. It's really key to have these +2 style baits. The jerkbait seemed to be the best. It definitely didn't cast as well. One of the big keys was a really long cast, so I kind of had to either play the wind or something along those lines. The Stunner 112 is a little bit heavier bait, so it was a little easier to bomb out there. But you can do it with these deep or ultra deep diving jerkbaits, not just a +1, but like a +2. I think Thunderhawk makes like a really big build. It almost looks like a walleye trolling kind of like jerkbait. That's another good option. The other thing that I figured out is I can do this with my standard wintered mid-depth crankbaits, but I have to make a mod. So an example, a DT8, a rock crawler, Spro, classic winter bait. And of course, one of my favorites, the Frittside, dude, but the deeper diving version. The only thing that I noticed though is these fish, when that bait would float up, because I did a little test to see like, hey, can I just like throw these baits standard and get them to react using that power retrieve? The one thing that I really figured out is they did not want that bait to rise. They would not follow it on the rise. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it's something that we know from our classic kind of winter experience that normally they want that bait to suspend during the winter, or maybe even like a slow sink, like a dying bait fish, like a dying shad. But the suspend or the slow sink was 100% key. You can do this with any mid-depth kind of crankbait, just as long as there's a couple different factors. One, I really think that the thinner body, we talk about flat side crankbaits, that's a DT8, has that thinner, more streamlined body. It has a very tight wobble. That's another thing, and that's why the jerkbait works so well. So I basically worked off like jerkbait concepts. What mid-depth crankbaits do I have that provide that flat, sort of tight wobble kind of deal? That's the little bit deeper Frittside right there. Once again, a very thin profile. The exception to that was the rock crawler. This one, I'll admit too, it was in a little bit dingier water, but one thing with the rock crawler or like a wiggle wart, for example, is it does have a very tight shimmy. It might be a wider style bait or a broader kind of bodied bait, but it has a super kind of unique, tight little shimmy. It's not your wide rocking kind of square bill style crankbait. And this one's a bit pricey, I'll be the first to admit. I always forget what it's called. It's the Megabass Deep X. And there's a few versions of this. I think there's a 100, a 200, and a 300. We focused on the 200 and the 300. Once again, though, it's a streamlined body, and the bill is not extremely wide. It's kind of a more slender bill, giving it sort of it's not a super tight wobble. This one's probably the widest out of all of them, but it's still a different kind of more wiggle wart style wobble where it's not this jaunting kind of rolling. It's just this tight little kind of shimmy as it goes down. Now with all of those, once again, the key was to modding those baits because they all float, right? They're either plastic or like the Rapala, the DT8s, or balsa. So what I did is I got out, and you guys have seen this a lot in the videos because I've been using it more and more to mod these baits based on how these fish react on my forward facing on my active target too. And that's the hairline lead line. I get the 0.30 diameter. This is on Tackle Warehouse. I'll put links to all this stuff too at Monster Bass and Tackle Warehouse for you guys to check out. But that was 100% the key, and doing it on the front hook. So I would take your standard, DT8 just like this, and just like a jerkbait mod, I would go ahead and wrap just a little bit of wire. It's probably like 2 inches of wire, maybe 3 inches of that lead 0.30 wire. I'd wrap it around the shank of the hook. That would make the bait kind of sit just like that, but what it would do is it would stop that rising action. On the balsa, you got to put a little bit more, on the plastic a little bit less, but it would stop that rising action. If it's rising just a hair, it's fine. It just can't be like bubbling up like a buoy. That was 100% just a no-go when it came to these fish. You really have to figure out how deep your fish are, and you want to stay above them. This is kind of counterintuitive when it comes to cranking. It makes a little more sense with jerkbait fishing, but just imagine it like jerkbait fishing a crankbait. So basically, you want to get that bait down so it's maybe 4 to 8 foot above the bottom, depending on how clear your water is, and you want to use that power retrieve. So you want to, sometimes you have to start off a little slow so you don't roll the bait on that initial cast, but make a cast as long as you can, right? Bomb that thing, dude. And then you're going to get it down, get it going a little, and then you're going to use that power retrieve. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, stop, 1, 2, 3, stop, 1, 2, 3, 4, stop, and use a little higher speed reel. You probably could use a 621. I like the 721 because I could not reel super duper fast and still get that fast retrieve on the bait. And then you want to have like a soft rod. I'm using a crankbait rod. I use mainly 12-pound fluorocarbon, depending on how clear your water is and also how deep you want to get the bait. You could use 10. The only thing I'll warn you about with the 10 is it will nick up. It's just like when we talk about summer cranking. You know, when you're doing those power retrieves and those high impact retrieves, it really, I don't care how nice your rod is, you still get kind of folds or sort of nicks in your line as you power retrieve and kind of pull that bait, especially when you set the hook. So just be mindful of that if you're going to go down to that 8 pound, but it will get you an extra 6 inches to a foot on a bait depth when you're doing that power retrieve, because you have less resistance. It's lower diameter line. It's a cool little play. Big keys though, use things that have tight wobbles, flat sides. You know, jerkbait's an easy one, ultra deep jerkbait. The other thing is those flat sided or those standard winter cranks, but you do not want to hit bottom. The trick is not hitting bottom. It's a lot like some of these forward-facing techniques that we've talked about where we're drawing fish up. So we're actually fishing kind of like mid-depth in deeper water. We're using mid-depth crankbaits, mid-depth semi-deep jerkbaits to draw fish up in deep water, 10, 12, 15, 20 foot of water. You want to get it just deep enough so that they can see it and they're looking up at it, maybe coming out of a ditch, coming off of a break, things along those lines, but they're rising to the bait. That's the whole trick, because they'll see it above, scooting along, stop, they'll start rising, you keep scooting it, they'll rise and chase, and at one point, hopefully, they'll absolutely close the deal and crush it. Another little trick that I'd recommend, and this is something whenever we're talking about crankbaits that I show you guys, use a clip, dude. I have 4,500, 780 of them. These are the owner, they're all welded clips, hyper weld clips. I'll put links to them at Tackle Warehouse. It makes it a lot easier if you're using a crankbait. I would not use it with the jerkbait. It seems to kind of play with the action a little bit, but on the crankbaits, it allows you to switch out and try different crankbaits with this technique very easily, very fluidly, and I do not think it takes a toll on your bite count by any means, but it makes it a lot easier to swap crankbaits out. Definitely something different. If you're into the minnow technique and you're not able to close, this is definitely a good follow-up to see if you can get some of those bites. It's also, I like to fish fast a lot of times. I like doing a lot of finesse and dangle stuff, but a lot of times when it comes to deep water this time of year, other than maybe doing a spoon or an A-rig or something like that, there aren't a ton of applications that you can fish super duper quick to get some of those reaction strikes, except for maybe using a super heavy trap and things along those lines. But this is definitely a different look, and I love crankbait fishing, and it's 100% like jerkbait fishing a crankbait, dude, like power jerkbait fishing. So it's something different that they haven't seen, and I don't think a lot of guys throw these kinds of baits in that column in this manner. The other thing that I'll warn you about is if you're going to use like these deep diving jerkbaits, something like the Stunner 112 plus one, something like this, the big bills on the jerkbaits. So they're great for making it dive. They give it kind of a funky action when you're jerking it. I did catch some fish doing your standard jerkbait retrieve. I'd get them to rise off the bottom, I'd get them all fired up, and then I'd pop it and do those jerks. Use very soft pops when you're using those long bill jerkbaits. They have a funky kind of action to them, and in my personal opinion, I think they catch more fish reeling them than actually jerking them. I had a lot of fish disengage and not want to play around with the bait when I started doing the jerking retrieve. They'd be right on it, they'd be super hot, ready to go, and I'd just start jerking to kind of keep the bait more in the strike zone and get them to follow. And except for the spotted bass, I really couldn't get the largemouth to really go on it, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that thing it does the twitch with that extremely long bill. When you're trying to kind of be subtle about it and make it dart, it makes it look funky underwater. So something to play around with. That's something you have to figure out on your own, but that was just my takeaway, especially watching forward facing and how they'd react. I got a majority of my bites 100% reeling, either the crankbait or the jerkbait. That was 100% the key. Hope you guys enjoy this. I want to go fishing, actually. It's kind of cold, but it's a nice little cloudy day out here on Gunnersville, so I'm going to go try this some more. If you guys got any questions or anything to add to this, or if you tried something like it, drop it down in the description box. I'll put links to everything that we talked about, the jerkbaits, the flat-sided cranks, and my Bass Mafia boxes, and that at Monster Bass and Tackle Warehouse for you guys to go check out if you're interested in it. But I will see you back out on the water talking fishing, hanging out with my sleeping dog. Later, boys.